The call came in at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning, and by noon I was sitting in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons off the 401, staring at my phone like it was going to tell me what to do next. They'd let me go. 31 years in electrical contracting, the last 9 with Hargrove Industrial, and they handed me a severance letter in a manila envelope and said the division was restructuring. The HR woman couldn't look me in the eye. I drove out of the lot in Brampton, merged onto the highway, and just kept going east. I wasn't ready to go home. I wasn't ready to explain it to anyone. My daughter didn't know. My ex-wife didn't know. Nobody knew yet. I sat in that Tim Hortons for 40 minutes, drank a large double-double, and tried to think of what I was going to say when I walked through the front door of my house in Whitby 2 weeks before I was supposed to be back. My daughter, Cassie, was 16. She'd been staying with me for the month while her mother was doing a work placement in Vancouver. We had an arrangement. We'd had one for the past 4 years ever since the divorce, and it worked mostly. Cassie and I were close. Or I thought we were. When I pulled into the driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, the house was quiet. That wasn't unusual. Cassie was in grade 11, and her school let out at 3:15. I figured she'd be back soon. I put my bag in the hallway and went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water and thought about how I was going to tell her that her dad had just lost his job. Then I noticed the note on the counter. It was from my neighbor, Paulette. She'd been keeping half an eye on the house while I was away. The note said, "Cassie asked me to water your plants. She mentioned she'd be away for a few weeks at a leadership retreat. Sounds like a great opportunity. Hope your trip went well." I read it twice. Cassie hadn't mentioned any retreat to me, not a word. I called her cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I texted her. Nothing. I stood in the kitchen for a moment thinking maybe I'd missed something. Maybe she'd told me and I'd forgotten. Work had been so consuming the past few months. Then I called her mother. My ex-wife picked up on the second ring, and I could tell from the half-second pause after I said hello that she was caught off guard by my call. I asked her if she knew where Cassie was. She said yes, she did. She said it like she was surprised I was asking. She told me Cassie had been having a hard time the last couple of months. Acting out. Skipping school. She said she and her sister, my ex-wife's younger sister, who I'd never gotten along with, had decided to enroll Cassie in a residential program outside of Trenton. 3 weeks. Room, board, structure, mentorship. She said the word mentorship like it was going to make me feel better. I asked her when she was going to tell me. She said she'd tried the call. She said she'd left a voicemail. I checked. There was no voicemail. I got back in the car. The drive from Whitby to Trenton is just under 2 hours on the 401. I made it in 90 minutes. I didn't eat anything. I didn't stop. I just drove east with the radio off and the windows cracked in my hands at 10 and 2 the entire way, because if I wasn't concentrating on something, I was going to lose my mind. I didn't know anything about this program. My ex-wife had given me the name Bridgepoint Youth Development and a rough sense of where it was. A property outside of town near the water. That was all. No website she could direct me to offhand. No pamphlet. No intake forms that she'd thought to send my way. She'd made this decision while I was in Brampton pulling cable at an industrial site, and she hadn't thought to tell me until I called her. Cassie was my daughter too. I had shared custody. I had rights. I found the place at around 4:45. It was set back from the road, a long gravel driveway cutting through a tree line to a cluster of low buildings, and what looked like a large greenhouse or polytunnel. There was a sign at the turnoff. Plain white blue letters, just the name and a phone number. The gate was open. I drove through. The first person I saw was a man in his 40s coming out of a side door. He was wearing a polo shirt with the Bridgepoint logo on the chest. He saw my car and immediately changed direction to intercept me, and something about that, the way he pivoted the moment he clocked me, purposeful, practiced, made my stomach drop. I got out of the car before he reached me. I told him I was there for my daughter. I told him her name. He smiled. He had one of those professional smiles, the kind they teach in customer service training, the kind that doesn't involve the eyes. He introduced himself as the program coordinator and said I was welcome to schedule a family visit through their intake process. He said they'd love to connect me with their parent liaison. He said all of this very smoothly, like he'd said it many times before. I told him I didn't want a family visit. and wanted to see my daughter now. He said that wouldn't be possible during the adjustment period. I asked him what the adjustment period was. He explained that in the first 2 weeks, participants weren't permitted contact with family members because it disrupted the structured environment. He said it was for the kids' benefit. He used phrases like immersive development and boundary calibration. I'd been in trades long enough to know that when someone uses a lot of words to say something simple, they're usually trying to stop you from thinking about what the simple version actually is. I said, "Is she being paid for any work she does here?" He blinked, just once. "Participants engage in vocational enrichment as part of their..." I said, "That's a no." I told him I was a joint custodial parent, that I had not consented to this placement, and that I was going to get my daughter and leave. He told me that my ex-wife had sole signing authority for this particular enrollment because of a form I apparently hadn't been sent a copy of. He said if I removed Cassie from the property without the consent of the admitting guardian, I could be in breach of the program agreement. I said I didn't care about his program agreement. He took out his phone. I told him to go ahead. I walked past him toward the greenhouse. Inside, it was hot. Not warm, hot. The kind of heat that sits in your chest when you breathe. There were grow lights strung from the metal frame overhead and long raised beds full of seedlings and what looked like early tomatoes. The air smelled like fertilizer and damp soil and something synthetic underneath it like plastic left in the sun. There were kids in there, maybe 14, 15 of them spread out along the rows. Some were planting, some were moving trays. They were quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of people who'd learned not to make noise. I saw her near the back, crouched over a planting tray with her hair pulled up under a cloth bandana. She was wearing the same gray t-shirt she'd had on the last time I saw her, 3 weeks ago when I left for the job. It was dirty at the hem. I said her name. She stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure she was hearing it right. She turned around, and the expression on her face when she saw me, it wasn't relief, not at first. It was something more complicated than that. It was the face of someone who'd been trying very hard not to hope for something, and who was suddenly confronted with the possibility that maybe they could. She said, "Dad?" I crossed the row and I put my hand on her shoulder and I said, "Yeah, I'm here. I've got you." She didn't cry right away. She just looked at me for a long moment like she was trying to confirm I was real. And then her face broke and she pressed her face against my shoulder and I held on to her in that overheated greenhouse with the grow lights buzzing overhead and I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say yet. After a minute, she pulled back and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and said, "They told me you and Mom agreed. They said you signed something." I told her I hadn't signed anything. She said, "They said I wasn't allowed to call you." I said, "I know. We're leaving." She nodded. She reached down and picked up a small jacket from under the planting table. And that small gesture, that she'd kept her jacket with her, that she hadn't let go of it, broke something in me that I'm still not entirely able to put back together. We started walking toward the door, and then Cassie stopped. She said, "There's a girl. She's 12. She's been here longer than me. She doesn't have anyone coming." I looked back down the row. A small kid near the far end, maybe 8 or 9 beds down, was watching us. She had the same gray t-shirt, the same cloth bandana. Her eyes were very still. I walked back down the row and I crouched down to her level and I asked her name. She said it was Tara. I asked if there was someone I could call for her. A parent, a grandparent, anyone. She said her grandmother was in Belleville. She said she hadn't been allowed to call her. I said, "Do you want to come with us while I figure this out?" She looked at me for a second. Then she looked at Cassie. Then she picked up her jacket. Same as Cassie, she'd kept it close, and she said okay. The coordinator was outside when we walked out. He had his phone out and there was another man with him now, bigger, who I hadn't seen before. The coordinator started saying something about liability and consent forms. I looked at the bigger man and said I was leaving with my daughter and with the child who had asked to leave, and that if either of them tried to physically prevent, that I would call the RCMP right now from the driveway. I said it very calmly because I'd had enough adrenaline in the past 2 hours that I'd gone through the shaky phase and out the other side into something quieter and harder. They stepped aside. I got both kids into the car. I drove down the gravel road and through the gate and turned east toward Trenton, and I called 911 from the car on hands-free and reported what I'd found and gave them the address. Cassie sat in the passenger seat. Tara sat behind her, very quiet, holding her jacket in her lap. After a few minutes, she asked if we could stop somewhere to eat. She said she hadn't had a full meal since she got there. She'd been at Bridgepoint for 22 days. We stopped at a diner on the edge of Trenton. It was the kind of place with laminated menus and a coffee urn on the counter and a woman who called everyone Han. Tara ate a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup and a piece of apple pie. She ate like she was afraid someone would take the plate away. I watched her eat and I didn't say anything about it because there was nothing to say about it that wouldn't make her feel worse. Cassie told me what she knew, which wasn't much. Her mother had told her the week before I was supposed to come home that she was going to a leadership retreat. Her mother had used that exact phrase, the same one on Paulette's note, and that it would look good on a university application. She said her mother had seemed certain about it, like it was already decided. Cassie had brought a duffel bag. She'd expected cabins and a ropes course and group sessions. What she found was a 4-to-a-room dormitory and a schedule that started at 6 a.m. and included 3 hours of agricultural work before noon, with minimal food, no cell phones, and what they called guided reflection in the evenings, which was a staff member telling a room full of teenagers that their attitudes were the reason they were there. She said she'd asked 3 times to call me. Each time she'd been told she was still in the adjustment period. I asked her if she'd been hurt. She said no, not physically. But she said there was a boy in the other dormitory. She'd seen him through the window of the greenhouse who'd been there since March. She'd talked to him through the fence line a few days in, before they'd told them not to interact with participants from other groups. He told her that, in the beginning, he'd cried and asked for his parents every day, and that after a while he'd stopped asking because it didn't change anything. She said he stopped expecting anyone to come. I had to look out the window for a moment at the parking lot and the highway past it and the flat Ontario sky going gray in the late afternoon. I had to take a breath. We called Tara's grandmother from the diner. An older woman answered, and when Tara said Grandma, the woman made a sound on the other end of the line that I won't try to describe. We arranged to drive Tara to Belleville, which was 40 minutes west. Her grandmother met us in the parking lot at Blah Blah's, and she took Tara by the face in both hands and just looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. Then she looked at me. She asked how I'd found her. I said my employer had let me go that morning and I'd come home 2 weeks early. She shook her head. She said, "Thank God." The police investigation took 4 months. My ex-wife had been told that Bridgepoint was an accredited residential youth program affiliated with a private educational foundation. She'd been given a printed brochure and a referral from her younger sister, who'd gotten it from a woman at her gym, whose son had apparently done well there. The enrollment fee had been $4,200, which my ex-wife had paid from her savings account. She hadn't done more research than that. I don't fully forgive her for it, but I've tried to understand it. She was struggling with Cassie. She didn't know where to turn. Someone offered her what sounded like a solution, and she wanted it to be true. So she didn't look too hard at the parts that didn't add up. What the investigation found was that Bridgepoint Youth Development was not accredited by any provincial or federal body. The woman who ran it had previously operated a similar program in New Brunswick that had been shut down after a complaint filed by a parent. The agricultural operation, the greenhouse, the vegetable beds, the early tomatoes, was producing commercial volume that was being sold wholesale to 2 restaurant supply companies in the Quinte region. The kids were doing the labor. The program was charging parents between $3,000 and $7,000 to enroll their children, and then generating additional revenue off the work those children produced. Some of the so-called counselors had no credentials of any kind. One had a prior conviction for fraud. 14 children removed from the property over the course of 3 days following my call. Some of them had been there for months. The woman who ran the operation was charged under the criminal code. 2 staff members were charged alongside her. The restaurant supply companies claimed they had no knowledge of how the labor was sourced, and that may even be true. But both of them have since been named in civil proceedings. My ex-wife was interviewed twice by investigators. She cooperated fully and was not charged, but Children's Aid opened a file and she had a long period of supervised visitation before things normalized. She's told me since that she thinks about it every day. I believe her. Cassie took a while to come back to herself. Not because anything overtly terrible happened to her. She was only there 11 days. She wasn't physically harmed. But because something subtler had happened. Something that's harder to name. She'd been sent somewhere against her will by someone she trusted. She'd asked for her father and been told no. She'd done what she was told and waited, and nothing had changed until something completely unrelated to her. My job ending, my drive home, my neighbor's note on the counter had pointed me in the right direction. She said once, about 6 weeks after, that she kept thinking about how easy it would have been for it to go differently. If I hadn't come home. If the note hadn't been there. If she'd been sent somewhere farther away. I didn't know what to say to that, because she was right. It could have gone differently very easily. What I told her was that when she said she needed me, when anyone she trusted said they needed me, I would be there. That's the promise. That's the only one I could make. She got back to school in October a few weeks late. Her teachers were understanding. She found a counselor she liked, a woman who came recommended through the school board. She started running in the mornings, something she'd never done before. She said it helped her to be moving. Tara, as far as I know, is living with her grandmother in Belleville. Her grandmother sent me a Christmas card that year with a short note inside. She said Tara was doing well. She said she was back in school. She thanked me again, and I understood why she needed to. But I've never been comfortable receiving that thanks, because what I did was simply refuse to leave without my daughter and refuse to leave a 12-year-old behind who asked to come with us. That doesn't feel like something that deserves particular credit. It feels like the floor. What I understand now, a year and a half out from that afternoon, is that these operations exist precisely because they look from the outside like solutions. They use the language of growth and structure and accountability. They have websites and brochures and referral networks and a veneer of legitimacy that's designed to reassure parents who are desperate enough not to examine it too carefully. And desperation is not stupidity. I know parents who are drowning. I know how hard it is to admit you don't know what to do, and how good it feels when someone seems to have an answer. The flag is always the same. Ask yourself, if I showed up unannounced tomorrow, would they let me in? If the answer is no, if there's a policy, an adjustment period, a reason why you have to schedule and wait and go through the proper channels, walk away. Your child is not in a place that has their interests at heart. And if your kid reaches out, even once, even through a note or a message you weren't meant to see, believe them. Ask questions later. Get them out first. Cassie is 17 now. She's training to be a wilderness first responder. She wants to do search and rescue. She says she wants to be the person who shows up. I think about the compressor that failed on the job in Brampton. I think about the HR woman who couldn't look me in the eye. I think about pulling into my driveway at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon and a handwritten note from my neighbor sitting on the counter. Some days I'm still angry. Some days I'm just grateful. Most days I'm both. But I drove home and I read the note and I got back in the car. That part, at least, I got right. I keep coming back to the compressor. Not the drive, not the diner in Trenton, not the man in the polo shirt stepping out to intercept my car. Just the compressor that failed at the Brampton site on a Tuesday morning and sent me home 2 weeks before anyone expected me. One small mechanical failure. One domino. And because of it, Cassie came home. Because of it, Tara got a ride to her grandmother's parking lot in Belleville and ate a grilled cheese sandwich and slept in her own bed that night. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe the universe arranged itself on my behalf. What I do believe is that actions have consequences that travel further than we can see at the time we take them, and that the reverse is also true. That inaction has consequences too, and those tend to be harder to trace because nothing happens, and nothing is easy to overlook. My ex-wife made a choice. She wanted to believe the brochure. She wanted the problem solved. That's not a monstrous impulse. It's a very human one. But she didn't ask enough questions, and she didn't make the call she should have made. And 14 children spent weeks in a greenhouse in the heat because enough parents in enough situations made similar choices. And the people running Bridgepoint were counting on exactly that. They built their entire operation on the gap between what desperate parents want to believe and what they're willing to verify. That gap is where those kids lived. What I know now is that integrity, the real kind, not the word on a motivational poster kind, is mostly just a series of small decisions to keep looking when you'd rather stop, to make the call you don't want to make, to ask the question that might complicate things. My ex-wife stopped looking. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's the mechanism. The harm didn't come from malice. It came from the willingness to settle for a surface-level answer when the stakes were too high for that. And then there's what Cassie said. 6 weeks out, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea, she kept thinking about how easily it could have gone the other way. That stopped me, because she was right, and because the thing that separated her outcome from a different one wasn't some grand act of heroism on my part. It was just that I didn't stop moving when I felt something was wrong. I drove. I walked past the man who told me to wait. I crouched down in a greenhouse and asked a 12-year-old her name. That's the part that matters to me, not the result. The willingness to keep going when stopping would have been easier. Cassie had that too. Inside that dormitory, every day she kept her jacket close and didn't give up on the idea that someone was coming. Tara had it in the way she answered me in a steady voice when she had every reason not to trust a stranger. There are things you can only do if you decide first that they're worth doing. No one taught me that in a classroom. I learned it in a diner off the 401, watching a 12-year-old eat a piece of apple pie like it might be the last good thing for a while. Cassie wants to do search and rescue. She wants to be the person who shows up. I think she already is.